It was earlier than we usually leave. Because Labor Day and Rosh Hashanah were days they missed school, the math teacher offered an early morning tutorial to ensure his students would have the instruction and support they needed to do well in their first test. When I got the email announcing that tutorial, I replied, "That is so thoughtful. Thank you." Oof, had I only known. So we got up extra early, left the house extra early, and I dropped my daughter off extra early. And the rest was downhill. Unknowingly, I took the worst possible route home to pick up my son to then take him to school. I quickly hit traffic, bad traffic, like snaking the feeder road, not moving at all traffic. Already feeling the anxiety and upset building in my gut, I quickly turned to self-talk, reassuring myself that when the light far, far ahead of me changed, the line would move up and it would all be okay. And as I sat and sat and sat, I felt myself quickly spiraling from a place of self-reassurance to panic as I watched the digital numbers on my clock change. I feared that there was no way I was going to get my son to be on time for school. I began having nothing less than a total temper tantrum alone in my car. I started timing the lights so that after I made it through this situation, I could call and complain to someone. City traffic management, TxDOT, the mayor, someone was going to hear all about this and have to fix this terrible situation. Then I resorted to counting the number of cars that made the turn for each light and calculating how long it would take for it to be my turn. The math was not helpful or encouraging. After that, I began weighing the risks of taking the clearly closed and mostly blocked off turnaround under the freeway, thinking, how closed does closed really mean? And would it be possible for my 10-year-old minivan to make the unpaved terrain without damage? I fluctuated between ridiculously seat dancing to Beyonce's new song and wanting to cry and pull out my hair. And that's when the A word came out. I said it loud, furious, and at my wit's end. I said it for everybody, but really nobody but myself to hear. Acceptance! Yes, you heard me right. Acceptance. Was that not the word you thought I was going to say? The A word is acceptance. Let me explain. In the spring of 2020, I began listening to the podcast called Last Day. It's a detailed look at the opioid crisis in America. It is heavy and thought-provoking, emotional, and most importantly, deeply informative. In the episode called Love is Why, Stephanie Whittles-Wax interviews siblings Teray Ross and DeRay McKesson and their father, Kelvin McKesson. The interview is about the realities of opioid addiction and the impact that it has had on their family. Kelvin described himself as a bookworm who succumbed to peer pressure to escape the feelings of never fitting in. Drugs were an escape from his reality. Kelvin later fell in love with and married Joan, who also used drugs. And for a while, things were, as they called it, normal. They kept using, but they worked, they paid their bills, they had their home, they had their life together. During Joan's pregnancy, she stopped using drugs to protect their unborn children. Once the kids were born, it was time to celebrate, and they began using again. With 2 small children and a wife to support, once Kelvin began losing jobs, he found it difficult to pay his rent. He powerfully described the events that led to his hitting bottom. He had taken his little daughter Teray to McDonald's, where he bought her a Happy Meal. He offered her the toy, and she didn't want it. He offered her the fries, and she didn't want those either. He then realized that she wanted the soda. When she removed the straw from its wrapper, she mimicked snorting cocaine with it, something she had seen her parents do at home. He feared at that moment that her life was over. Kelvin recalled that a man sitting near them who saw this happen shook his head in disgust. and Calvin was filled with shame and guilt. And on that day, he promised to be a better father. And so he began his path of recovery and sobriety. Sadly, Joan was not successful in recovery and continues to struggle with her health and wellness and is mostly estranged from her children. The episode details the struggle and pain of loving someone who lives with addiction. Towards the end of the episode, Calvin says these powerful words: "The key to happiness is acceptance. Anything you can accept, you can conquer. If you can accept it, it doesn't have to conquer you." Calvin says this means living one day at a time, enjoying each moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace, and really just accepting things as they are. In human psychology, acceptance is a person's assent to the reality of a situation. It's recognizing a process or condition without attempting to change it or protest it. Acceptance means allowing unwanted private thoughts, feelings, and urges to come and go without struggling with them or judging them. For many, this idea seems buzzy woo-woo or too new agey, but it's not novel. 2,000 years ago, former Roman emperor and philosopher Marcus Aurelius said, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in a pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs?" At its core, acceptance is leaving life alone, letting it be. Rabbi Bernard Raskus tells this story of a distraught woman in a Boston hotel who called the manager and said, "I am dizzy and faint. My whole body is trembling. Someone in the next room has been banging on a piano all day. If you don't have it stopped, I shall collapse." The manager replied, I wish I could help you, madam, but I don't dare. That pianist is rehearsing for his concert tonight in Symphony Hall." The complaining woman responded with great excitement and immediately began inviting friends to come and listen. Author Daniel A. Miller writes that acceptance is a choice we make. We can choose to accept people and circumstances as they are or not. If you choose acceptance, that very act births opportunities that can transform your life, the lives of others, and the world. Miller asserts that the blessings of acceptance are bountiful. In the truest sense, acceptance is the path to peace and serenity. The choice is ours. We can hear the musicians practicing as bothersome noise that frays our nerves, or choose to experience it as an exciting sneak peek to the symphony concert. Throughout the Torah, we see lots of examples of acceptance and redemption. We read when God saw how corrupt the earth was, he told Noah of his plan to do away with the evil and instructed him to build an ark for his family and the pairs of animals. Do you know what Noah says? He says nothing. He accepts the situation and he builds the ark. Just last week on Rosh Hashanah, the cantor chanted the Akedah. It tells of Abraham listening to God, accepting his task to take his beloved son Isaac to the mountain to make a sacrifice, trusting in God, and looking up then to see the ram in the thicket for the offering. And as we near the end of the book of Deuteronomy, we read of Moses accepting God's decree to ascend the mountain to die, never being allowed to enter the promised land, and leading the ancient Israelites on their arduous slog through the desert. We read of Job, who loses everything and says, "The Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." The Bible tells us that Job did not sin, nor did he cast reproach on God. And we read of Joseph, sold into slavery by his jealous brothers and imprisoned by Potiphar, accepting his circumstances and waiting, and ultimately becoming the salvation his family and the community needs in time of famine. We're also familiar with Torah text that demonstrates what happens when we fail to accept what is. Rabbi Yitzchak of Vorky said Adam's real sin was that he worried about the future. The serpent reasoned with him, "How can you serve God when you cannot tell the difference between good and evil? How can you make a choice? Just eat of this fruit, though, and you'll be able to tell, and then you will choose good and receive its reward." Adam's fault lay in accepting this argument. He worried that he would not be able to serve, yet at that very moment, he had his duty to obey God and resist the serpent. The Hasidic teaching suggests that Adam's real sin was failing to accept life as it was and just letting things be. Adam sacrifices the gift of Eden and attempts to have more control. Our ancestral matriarch, Rebecca, is unwilling to accept that her favored son, Jacob, will not get the blessing and privileges of the precious birthright. As a result, she helps to orchestrate the deception of her blind husband, Isaac, and creates a terrible family fracture. And Lot's wife, when instructed to flee from the evils of Sodom and Gomorrah and not look back, cannot accept the need to just go forward, and in looking back is turned to a pillar of salt. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 reminds us there is a time for every experience under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time for planting, a time to uproot what is planted, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing. We are powerfully reminded that being present in every time, the good and the not so good, the pleasurable and the painful, are all part of life. We do not get to pick and choose what happens to us, only if we accept it and how we respond. It is our ability to accept whatever comes our way that can lead us to live with more peace and serenity. Jewish religious practice can help us achieve greater acceptance in our lives. Participating in worship services can often help slow our overactive minds and help us reconnect with our spiritual selves and accept what's going on around us and inside our souls. Saying blessings throughout our day and in the different seasons of the year helps us to be present in the moment and more likely to accept what is. And when we say Kaddish for a loved one, we acknowledge and accept the reality of their death. And we praise and thank God for the beauty and blessing of their soul with whom we shared life. Ultimately, acceptance is surrendering that which we never had, control. For those thinking that acceptance means throwing up your hands and just taking every single thing that comes your way and getting beaten up by life, that's not the case at all. Actor, author, and activist Michael J. Fox was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at 29. He asserts that acceptance does not mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is, and there's got to be a way through it. To be clear, acceptance is not condoning another's behavior or a bad situation. Acceptance is not giving in to others or things. Acceptance does not mean that you cannot have reasonable expectations or have boundaries. Acceptance does not mean that you can't be angry or resentful, or that you must surrender your lot in life, or that you have no viable choices. According to Daniel Miller, true acceptance means accepting people and things as they are without judgment or harboring negative feelings such as fear, anger, resentment. Simply put, acceptance is embracing life as it is. For those of us who like to have control, who have a very clear sense of how things are supposed to be, and spend a lot of time and energy orchestrating and ensuring those outcomes, this is really difficult. We were taught that we can control our own destiny. We were taught to never give up. We were taught to work hard and not accept what is or settle for second best. We do what we do because it is what we have always done, and we think it works. But when we are honest, we must admit that it is not working. We are emotionally drained and exhausted from the past year and a half of pandemic. We are disillusioned by the political divide. We are fatigued from natural disasters and all the suffering that we see around us. We yearn just to keep it together long enough to get to the other side of all this hard stuff and then hit refresh. there is no refresh button. When we fail to accept what is, we experience more stress, more upset, and less satisfaction in life because we are fighting against it. Studies show that emotional resistance can lead to physical and mental health struggles. Today, this holiest day of the year, is a day to atone and return to the at-one-ment with our Creator and our truest selves by way of acceptance. Today, we are called to stop and reflect, to get quiet, to reconnect with our being, our souls. Today, we can choose to change and do something different. We can decide that it is time to stop pushing against others, our life circumstance, the world around us, even ourselves. We can start today. In this instant, we can decide that we're going to accept what is and do our very best with that. We can decide that we will accept what is one moment at a time, and then the next one after that. We will acknowledge all the feelings along the way, and will allow them to pass through us, and then just let it be. I imagine some of you listening to me are thinking, that's all very well and good, Rabbi. It's a lovely message, and being accepting is a wonderful idea, but you just don't get it. There are things in my life that I just cannot accept, that I will never accept. To you I say, please hear me. If you are suffering from illness or pain, if you have lost a precious loved one and feel devastated, if you have wounds and aches in your soul that cut you to the core, you are not alone. I see you. This sacred community is here to help hold you. I urge you to consider what it might look like to lean towards acceptance. No, acceptance will not cure your disease. Acceptance will not take away your physical pain. Acceptance will not bring back your dear one or make the fact that you were betrayed and hurt go away. But acceptance will feel like a lot less work and resistance to that which already is, that which you cannot control. And acceptance may free you up to better enjoy, appreciate, and find peace in the rest of your life. Spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle teaches, throughout history, there have been women and men who, in the face of great loss, illness, imprisonment, or impending death, have accepted the seemingly unacceptable and thus found the peace that passeth all understanding. Acceptance of the unacceptable is the greatest source of grace in the world. We all need that grace, especially now. In conclusion, Harold V. Melchert wrote, "Live your life each day as you would climb a mountain. An occasional glance towards the summit keeps the goal in mind, but many beautiful scenes are to be observed from each new vantage point. Climb slowly, steadily, enjoying each passing moment, and the view from the summit will serve as a fitting climax for the journey. Ultimately, the choice is ours. Today is the day to choose. Our Torah portion told us to choose life. Let us choose acceptance as a path to a more peaceful, happy, and contented life. Amen."